are the differences between a SOC 1, SOC 2, and a SOC 3? A SOC 1 is a report over the internal control over financial reporting at a company. This report is typically used by companies that impact the financial statements of their customers. For example, if you're a payroll company and you're performing the payroll for your customers, you're remitting taxes, you have to make sure that you have appropriate controls in place to make sure that the payroll you're calculating, the taxes you're remitting are complete and accurate. So your customers are going to want to get a SOC 1 report because the numbers you're providing to them are going to directly impact their financial statements. A SOC 1 does include a portion of IT controls and security controls, but it's not as in depth as a SOC 2. A lot of the SOC 1 controls cover financial control objectives for completeness and accuracy of the data that you're providing to your customers. A SOC 2 is an internal control report over the security, availability, confidentiality, processing integrity, or privacy of a system that's in scope. These reports are very in-depth on security controls, much more than a SOC 1 report. The criteria for a SOC 2 are defined, unlike in a SOC 1, where the control objectives are defined by the company. So in a SOC 2, you have to have controls in place to meet certain criteria, whereas in a SOC 1, you can choose your own control objectives and then have controls in place to meet those control objectives. The SOC 2 is also not necessarily tied to your customers' fiscal years. They're not using it for their financial statements. They're using it for risk management. That's the main focus of a SOC 2. A SOC 3 is very similar to a SOC 2. The only way you can get a SOC 3 is if you actually do the same procedures as you would in a SOC 2. So it's the same control, same criteria. The CPA firm performing the audit is actually performing the same procedures as they would in a SOC 2. The main difference between a SOC 3 and a SOC 2 is that a SOC 3 is allowed to be publicly released. It's freely distributed. There's no restriction on how you can distribute that report. So that means a SOC 3 report can be posted on your company website and anybody can access it, where a SOC 2 report cannot be posted on your public website. It has to be restricted and customers have to request that report. The other main difference between a SOC 3 and a SOC 2 is that a SOC 3 report will not include the testing that the CPA firm performed. Because it's a public, freely distributed report, it's very limited in the information that's included in it. So the CPA firm's testing, the results of their testing, are not going to be included in a SOC 3 report. How do you choose the right SOC report? So this is an interesting question. So if you know the differences between a SOC 1, a SOC 2, and a SOC 3, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, what are my customers looking for? If your systems are going to impact the financial statements of your customers, then you're probably going to need a SOC 1 report. If your customers are mainly concerned about the security of their data and they're using your services and they don't directly impact their financial reports, the numbers, the information you're producing from your system doesn't impact their financial statements, they're probably going to want a SOC 2. So if you're a cloud company, if you're a SaaS company, and all you do is have their data and then you process their data, they use your system to process their data, that's their main concern. Nothing they produce out of that system is going to impact their financial statements. So they're going to be concerned about a SOC 2. Do you need a SOC 3? So a SOC 3 report is a report that can be freely distributed. It's not necessary all the time. I mean, sometimes it's important for marketing purposes to have that SOC 3 report publicly available on your website so customers can see it. But that's the main reason why you would want to get a SOC 3. But you would never do a SOC 3 without doing a SOC 2 because it's the same procedures that the auditor has to perform in order to issue a SOC 3 that they have to do for a SOC 2. So if you're going to go get a SOC 3, you might as well also get a SOC 2 report issued. There are times when a SOC 1 and a SOC 2 are necessary. A lot of times, if the company, like a payroll company, they're getting sensitive data, obviously, and they're impacting their customers' financial statements, they probably are a good candidate for getting both a SOC 1 and a SOC 2. So it mainly comes down to what your customers are really asking you for, what they're requesting, and the information that you think they're going to need to manage the risk of using your services. Why is the security category the baseline, and when might you add other additional categories into your SOC 2 report? So obviously security is the most important aspect of any information security compliance program. So security is going to be the baseline for SOC 2. Security is also known as the common criteria in SOC 2. So all of the criteria were actually based on the SOC 2, the security criteria, and they make up the common criteria. If you want to add other additional categories into the report, the other ones are availability, confidentiality, processing integrity, and privacy. You always have to include security, aka the common criteria, as part of your SOC 2 report, and then you add on the additional criteria for the other 4 that I mentioned. Sometimes you might want to add other areas in. A lot of times cloud service providers and SaaS companies will include availability and confidentiality in their report. It's a pretty common practice for them to do that for obvious reasons. Obviously, security is important. Availability of your system. If your customers are logging into your system over the internet, they want to make sure that it's available. A lot of times these companies are hosted in AWS, Microsoft Azure, GCP, and the like. And so you're kind of relying on those cloud service providers to ensure that your system is available, but you have some responsibility for that. So some of those controls are going to be outsourced to those cloud service providers for availability, but you still will have to have business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans, backup plans. You need to have all those pieces in place in order to recover your system, even if maybe an availability zone goes out in AWS. Are you cross-regional? You might need that in order to recover your systems. Confidentiality is really focused on data retention, data classification. Are you keeping that data confidential and handling it appropriately? So those 3 are obviously the most common. Processing integrity sometimes is important. If you have a very complex system where you're processing data and you're outputting data and transforming that data for your customers, they might be concerned about how that data is actually being processed in the system. It's rare to include processing integrity, but there are times when it makes sense. Privacy, if you're dealing with personal identifiable information, if you're concerned with personal information due to GDPR, privacy might be a focus. If you're dealing with protected health information in the HIPAA world, privacy might be an important focus for you. It's privacy. Just remember privacy in SOC 2, the criteria for privacy. That doesn't mean you pass privacy, you get all the privacy criteria and you're meeting those. It doesn't mean you're going to be complying with HIPAA regulations. You're not going to be complying with the GDPR, CCPA. So privacy is really a way to show customers and give them assurance over privacy, but it does not show compliance to any laws or regulations dealing with privacy.